The woods of Clay County do not welcome outsiders, especially near the forgotten lane where the ground sinks and the air grows unnaturally still. Folks say the trees there lean inward, as if trying to block something from escaping, but no one in town speaks of what happened in the summer of 1894. They only warn travelers to stay away from the old Bledsoe homestead, the place where the soil still shifts and the wind carries whispers that do not belong to the living. On a fading autumn evening, a lone wanderer stepped through those twisted trees, drawn by a sound he couldn't explain, a hollow, rhythmic tapping that rose from somewhere beneath the earth, too deliberate to be branches knocking together. The abandoned house appeared through the fog like a skeleton of timber and rot, its windows dark and its walls sagging under decades of secrets. Yet the knocking continued, steady, patient, as though it had been waiting for someone to hear it again. Curiosity pushed him past the warped door and into rooms heavy with mildew and dust. A smell of wet stone drifted from the back of the house, guiding him to a well built from crumbling limestone, its opening covered by a half-broken plank. When he leaned closer, the cold rising from its depths felt almost like breath. Then the tapping stopped, only to be replaced by a low, trembling whisper that made his skin crawl. He stumbled back, heart pounding, certain that no voice from that depth should have survived a single night, let alone a century. The fading light stretched shadows across the yard, and for a moment he could almost see two figures standing near the tree line, small and unmoving, as if watching him with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. The forest seemed to close tighter around the house, the well, and the voice below, leaving him with the terrible sense that he hadn't discovered a mystery but awakened one. The drifter, worn from miles of wandering, had only meant to cut through the woods before nightfall, but the forest felt strangely intentional that day, steering him with narrowing paths and unnatural bends in the trees. The deeper he moved into the Alabama backwoods, the more the air thickened, carrying a quiet that wasn't peaceful but watchful. Even the birds avoided the place, leaving only the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots and the faint feeling that each step was being measured by unseen eyes. When he reached the clearing, it wasn't the house he noticed first, it was the way the trees seemed to recoil from it, as though they had spent years trying to swallow it but failed. Vines gripped the frame, boards sagged inward, and the roofline dipped like a broken spine. Yet the structure still stood defiantly, stubborn in its decay, surrounded by knee-high grass that swayed without wind, moving as if stirred from below rather than above. He paused, unsure why the sight made his chest tighten. Old houses were nothing new to him, he'd slept in barns, abandoned cabins, even collapsed sheds without a hint of unease. But this place felt different, as though it carried the residue of every scream, every confession, every sin that had seeped into its walls over decades. Something about it radiated unfinished business, a wrong that had settled into the soil and refused to rot with the wood. As he took a cautious step forward, he heard it for the first time, a faint, hollow echo carried from somewhere behind the house. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to tease the edge of his awareness, like a spoon tapping a distant pot or a knuckle brushing against stone. He froze, straining his ears, but the woods remained still. The sound came again, steady, rhythmic, undeniably deliberate. Curiosity and unease tangled in his stomach as he moved toward the noise, each step sinking into damp earth that seemed too soft, as though something beneath the ground had been moved recently. When he rounded the side of the house, the clearing widened, revealing the overgrown yard and a stone well swallowed by creeping vines. The sound was unmistakable now, rising from the darkness below like a secret calling to be acknowledged. The drifter stood at the edge of the yard, breathing in the cold air that rushed upward, carrying with it a scent of wet stone and something older, something human. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he heard that first echo, he crossed a threshold that no traveler before him had survived, stepping into a story the forest had kept buried for a century. He edges toward it carefully, each step dragging through the thick grass that carpets the forgotten yard, and the forest behind him seems to hold its breath. The knocking continues in a slow, deliberate rhythm, echoing upward with a hollow resonance that sends a shiver along his spine. It reminds him of something trapped, something patient, something that has waited far too long for anyone to hear. The well itself looks ancient, its stones covered in moss and its rim cracked from years of neglect. Vines droop over the lip like withered fingers, and the wooden cover meant to seal it lies splintered in two, leaving a jagged opening that exposes a shaft of darkness so deep it seems to swallow the faint evening light. As the knocking grows slightly louder, he leans over a fraction, not daring to get too close, his breath hitching as the cold rising from below prickles his skin. For a moment he convinces himself it could be water dripping or some old piece of debris shifting. But the rhythm stops suddenly, then starts again, 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, another silence. It is unmistakably intentional. He steps back instinctively, his mind racing through explanations that don't involve anything alive waiting in a place where no one should be. He glances around the yard, half expecting someone to emerge from the trees and explain the sound, but the woods remain unnervingly still. Not even insects dare to hum near the old homestead. The drifter wipes his palms on his trousers, feeling the weight of the place settling around him, the air thickening as if the forest itself doesn't want him to leave. He circles the well slowly, scanning the stones for signs of recent disturbance, and notices deep scratches near the rim, long, ragged lines carved into the limestone, as though fingers or metal worked frantically to escape. The knocking stops again, plunging the yard into an eerie silence that feels heavier than the sound itself. He debates calling down the well, but something about the stillness warns him not to draw attention to himself. The silence stretches, and he tells himself to walk away, to return to the path before the sun disappears completely. Then, just as he turns, the sound rises once more, not a knock this time, but a faint, trembling scrape, like something shifting its weight far below. It's followed by a soft exhale, a whisper of breath that should not exist in a sealed darkness. The drifter's pulse thunders as he realizes the truth no one wants to consider. Something down in that well is not only alive but listening, responding to his presence, and it has been waiting for a very long time. The interior feels colder than the outside air, as if the house has been storing winter within its walls for decades. Dust floats in slow spirals, disturbed only by the soft creak of floorboards beneath his cautious steps. The smell hits him next, a mix of damp wood, mold, and something metallic that clings to the back of his throat. He moves deeper, brushing past cobwebs that cling to his jacket, and his lantern beam sweeps across peeling wallpaper patterned with faded roses. Every corner seems to hold a shadow that shifts just a moment too late, as though watching his movements. It is in the back room, near a collapsed dresser, that he notices a loose section of floorboard slightly lifted at one edge. It looks deliberately pried up, not warped from time like the others. Kneeling, he wedges his fingers beneath the plank and pulls it free, revealing a small hollow space beneath the floor. Inside lies a water-damaged journal bound in cracked leather, its pages warped and stained from years of damp air. He hesitates before touching it. Even without opening it, the object radiates an unsettling weight, as though it carries more than memories. The journal's cover bears a faint engraving, initials scratched by a shaky hand, L and M. He flips through the fragile pages carefully, and the scrawled handwriting leaps out at him in uneven, desperate strokes. The earliest entries are childish, simple lines about chores, the woods, and strict parents who rarely allowed the girls beyond the yard. But as he reads further, the tone darkens. The script grows erratic, rushed, filled with blotches where the ink had smeared, as if written in panic or with trembling hands. The entries describe nights when their father locked them in the cellar for disobedience, days when their mother forced them to kneel for hours in silence, and cryptic notes about the lessons they were required to endure. The drifter's stomach knots as he flips to a page where the writing spirals across the paper, repeating the same line, "The well is where the truth sleeps." Another section details strange noises the girls heard coming from beneath the stone pit, the same rhythmic sounds he heard just moments earlier. The journal begins to read like a descent into madness, or perhaps an attempt to make sense of a horror no child should endure. The last legible entry, written in shaking letters, reads, "We cannot take the night again. The voices say they will help us. The voices say it is time." As he closes the journal, a soft thud echoes somewhere above him, dust drifting down from the rafters as though the house itself has stirred at the rediscovery of its buried memories. The drifter realizes the book is not just a record of suffering but a map of what drove the sisters to the edge, and possibly into the darkness that still breathes from the depths of the well outside. The small town sits miles down the dirt road, a cluster of weather-beaten buildings where shutters creak in the wind and porches sag under the weight of years. As he enters, the townsfolk watch him with thinly veiled suspicion, their eyes tracking him from doorways and shop windows. Folks in this corner of Alabama are not ones to welcome strangers, especially those who come from the direction of the old Bledsoe homestead. He approaches the general store first, hoping for a simple conversation, but the moment he mentions the house, the storekeeper's expression hardens. The man's hand freezes midair, hovering above a stack of canned goods, and he quietly tells the drifter that nothing good ever came from that land. When pressed, the storekeeper reluctantly shares fragments of the story, each spoken in a hushed tone as though afraid the woods might overhear. He explains that the twin sisters, Lila and May, were rarely seen after their birth. Their parents kept them out of sight, claiming they were frail and easily frightened by strangers, but everyone in town knew something was wrong long before whispers of violence began. Some believed the family line was cursed, that the parents were too closely related for their children to come into the world whole. Others claimed the girls were born touched by darkness, prone to wild fits and strange behavior whenever they were caught beyond their fence. No one ever saw them smile, no one ever heard them speak above a whisper. But what unsettled the townsfolk most were the times they disappeared for days, only to reappear near the well with bruises and glassy eyes, as if returning from another world entirely. The drifter listens, absorbing every detail, but he senses the storekeeper is holding back. Later, at the small diner near the edge of town, he meets an older woman who claims to remember the sisters more clearly. Her voice shakes as she describes how the girls would watch the townspeople from the shadows, always together, always silent, their pale faces and tangled hair giving them the appearance of feral children. Rumors spread that their parents were not just strict but cruel, enforcing punishments so severe that no one dared interfere. Yet no one could explain the strange lights seen flickering around the homestead at night or the eerie sounds that carried across the fields, soft harmonies, almost like voices, rising from deep beneath the earth. By the time the drifter leaves town, he realizes the people are not merely afraid of the memories, they are afraid that the sisters never truly left. The forest, they say, keeps its secrets, and the well keeps everything else. The storm that struck in the summer of 1894 was unlike anything the county had seen before. Thunder rolled in early, rumbling across the sky like a warning, and by dusk the clouds had swallowed the last traces of daylight. Rain came down in hard sheets, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud and drowning out every sound except the constant roar of wind. Most families stayed inside, shuttering their homes and stoking their hearths, but at the Bledsoe homestead, the storm became a cloak that hid unspeakable things. Neighbors would later say that the lightning that night cast strange shadows over the treetops, shapes that moved against the wind, but Northwest one ventured close enough to know for sure what was happening. Inside the crumbling house, the sisters had reached their breaking point. The journal suggested that the day leading up to the storm had been filled with another round of punishments, hours of confinement, harsh words, and blows meant to shape them, as their father put it. Something, however, changed in the air that evening. The journal mentioned voices whispering from the well, voices that had long promised the girls escape if they would only listen. Whether those voices were real or born from years of trauma and isolation, the effect was the same. As the wind howled and the shutters slammed, Lila and May acted. The storm became their ally, hiding the sounds of struggle as they dragged their parents across the warped floorboards. Lightning illuminated the yard in brief flashes, revealing muddy footprints leading from the house to the well, prints too small to belong to adults. Thunder masked the thuds and cries, the scraping of chains being dragged over stone, the grunt of effort as the girls wrestled with weight far greater than their slight frames suggested they could move. The neighbors who lived farthest from town would later swear they heard something unusual through the storm's roar, a muffled scream abruptly cut off, followed by a rhythmic clang rising above the wind. No one investigated, telling themselves it was only the storm playing tricks. The journal hinted at the sisters' fear, not of their parents' retaliation, but of the quiet that followed when the deed was done. They wrote of standing side by side at the well's edge, listening to the storm swallow every sound until even the voices below went silent. The drifter imagines the scene vividly now, two drenched, trembling girls illuminated by lightning, staring into the darkness they had fed. The storm raged on, but inside that moment lay the seed of everything that still haunts the woods, everything that breathes through the well whenever someone dares to listen. The storm-scarred memories he imagined now bleed into the present as he approaches the stone structure, compelled by a mix of fear and a need to understand what really happened. The woods seemed darker than before, their branches tangled overhead like skeletal arms, and the yard around the well feels unnaturally quiet, as though the land itself is bracing for him to uncover something it has spent decades concealing. He steps closer, the earth soft beneath his boots, and the smell of damp moss and cold stone rises from the depths. As he brushes aside the vines clinging to the rim, his lantern light flickers across the limestone, revealing deep grooves carved into its surface. At first he thinks they're cracks from age, but as he leans in, he sees the unmistakable shape of drag marks, long and erratic, as though something, or someone, had clawed desperately at the stone. The realization sends a chill down his spine. The marks are far too precise, far too frantic to be the result of weather or erosion. He runs his fingers over them, feeling the jagged edges that crumble slightly under his touch, imagining the panic behind each scrape. The chains come into view next, half buried beneath a layer of dirt and creeping roots. They lie curled beside the well like the shed skin of some rusted serpent, heavy iron links coated in years of corrosion. One end is still bolted into the stone, the other snapped clean, as if under a force far greater than human hands should wield. The drifter crouches, pulling gently at the broken links, feeling the weight of them and the grim purpose they once served. The image of the sisters dragging their bound parents through the storm suddenly feels painfully real, the evidence lying before him in cold metal and carved stone. The air around the well shifts as he investigates, a faint vibration trembling through the ground, too subtle to be wind. He glances down into the darkness, his lantern's glow barely scratching the blackness below. The chains rattle slightly under his hand, a soft metallic whisper that doesn't belong to the still evening. For a moment, he wonders if something brushed them from inside the well, a thought he tries to dismiss but cannot shake. His heartbeat quickens as he imagines the parents struggling against the chains, the raw terror etched into the limestone by their last desperate attempts to escape. The woods press closer, the silence tightening until he feels as though he's being watched from every direction. The drifter realizes then that the chains are more than evidence, they are a grim reminder of a night when the boundary between suffering and something far darker was shattered, leaving behind a presence that has never stopped reaching upward from the depths of the well. After examining the broken links and the scarred stone, he lingers too long at the edge, his lantern casting a trembling circle of light around the mouth of the well. The air feels heavier now, charged with something he can't name. He leans in slightly, listening for any trace of movement, telling himself he will hear nothing. But the darkness below seems alive, swallowing the light and returning only silence, an unnatural silence that feels almost intentional. He is about to step back when the knocking returns, louder and more desperate than before, reverberating through the stone walls and rising like a heartbeat from the earth itself. The rhythm is uneven now, frantic, as though whatever is beneath has sensed the presence of someone new. The drifter stiffens, breath caught in his throat. His rational mind fights to shape the sound into something harmless, maybe an animal trapped below or a loose stone shifting deeper in the shaft. But then the knocking stops so abruptly it feels as if the well is holding its breath. The silence stretches, thick and expectant. A soft scrape follows, slow and deliberate, as though nails are dragging along the stone far beneath him. He staggers back instinctively, his lantern swinging and sending shadows leaping up the worn limestone. His pulse hammers so loudly he almost doesn't hear the next sound, but it comes, clearer, closer, impossible. A voice rises from the darkness, faint but unmistakable, quivering like the last echo of a dying plea. It isn't words at first, just a strained, breathy murmur that carries the weight of unbearable time. He freezes, unsure if he is hearing the remnant of a past tragedy or something trying to reach him now. When the whisper comes again, it carries shape, a rhythm, and something resembling a name, though distorted and warped by the depths. He stands rooted to the spot, convinced for a moment that the well is calling him specifically, that whatever lingers below has attached itself to his presence. The sound is followed by a weak tap against the stone, almost like a hand pressing upward, pleading for release. The drifter's skin crawls as the truth forces itself into his thoughts. The well is not merely echoing an old memory, not repeating the sounds of those who died within. Something is responding to him, aware of him, acknowledging him. The forest seems to tighten around the clearing, and the temperature drops sharply, the cold seeping into his bones. The faint voice drifts upward again, clearer this time, as though rising through layers of earth and time. It doesn't speak with anger or fear, it speaks with recognition. That recognition terrifies him more than anything else, suggesting that whatever lies below has waited through silence and rot and darkness for someone just like him to come close enough to hear it. His lantern shakes in his hand as he moves toward the house again, hoping that something inside, anything, will offer a rational explanation for what he just heard. The decaying structure looms in the darkness like a wounded animal, its warped boards groaning softly in the wind. He steps through the broken doorway, the air inside colder than before, as if the house itself has absorbed the chill of the well. His boots thud quietly across the uneven floorboards, each step stirring dust that hangs in the air like suspended ash. He tells himself he is imagining the whispers that seem to trail behind him, but they grow more insistent the farther he walks, slipping between the creaks of the house like faint breaths. He searches the rooms with growing urgency, feeling guided more by instinct than curiosity. The journal had hinted that the girls were often punished in a cellar, a space that served as both prison and place of lessons. If there was any truth buried beneath this nightmare, it would be down there. He drifts toward the back of the house, where the boards feel softer underfoot, and the walls bow inward as though collapsing under the weight of history. His lantern casts a trembling glow across the warped floorboards when he notices it, a slight line near the corner, almost invisible beneath a layer of grime. Kneeling, he brushes away the dust, revealing the outline of a trapdoor nearly fused shut by time. The wood is damp and swollen, and when he tugs at the rusted iron ring, it resists, groaning loudly as if protesting his intrusion. With a final pull, the trapdoor snaps upward, releasing a rush of cold, stale air that reeks of mold and earth. The lantern light dips into the narrow stairway carved from stone and dirt, the steps descending into a blackness thicker than any night. He hesitates, feeling the weight of the house pressing down around him, but something in the air feels expectant, urging him onward. He descends slowly, gripping the wall for balance, each step stirring a faint whisper of dust that drifts around his ankles. The cellar below is small and cramped, lit only by the trembling halo of his lantern. The walls are covered in crude scratches, symbols etched in desperate repetition, and small hand-drawn figures that resemble the sisters, two shapes standing beside a dark pit. Strange objects litter the floor, broken toys, frayed ropes, a wooden paddle, a rusted chain too small for an adult wrist. As he explores, he notices a section of the earthen wall that appears uneven, as though something heavy had been dragged against it repeatedly. A faint hum seems to pulse through the foundation, almost like a heartbeat synced with the knocking he heard above. The cellar feels alive, steeped in echoes of punishment, confinement, and secrets too dark for daylight. The drifter realizes this room is not just the sisters' prison, it is the birthplace of everything warped in that house, everything the well swallowed, and everything that may still be crawling its way back into the world. The house feels tighter now, less empty, as though the walls have shifted while he was below. The air carries a faint hum, pulsing like a distant heartbeat, and every shadow seems to stretch a little too far across the rotting floorboards. He moves cautiously toward the doorway, eager to put distance between himself and the suffocating basement, but a strange stillness grips the yard outside. The wind has died completely, and the forest seems frozen, its branches held in place as though waiting. He pauses on the threshold, lantern trembling slightly in his grip. Something feels deeply wrong. Then, through the thinning mist near the edge of the tree line, he sees two pale shapes emerging from the darkness. At first, he thinks they must be passing deer or perhaps the twisting of moonlight through the branches. But as the shapes come into clearer view, he recognizes the unmistakable outline of two figures, thin, unnaturally rigid, standing side by side in perfect stillness. Their silhouettes are small, childlike, with tangled hair spilling down their shoulders, just as the townspeople had described. They do not move. They do not sway. They do not blink. They only watch him. The drifter's heart lurches as he struggles to reassure himself that he is seeing illusions made by exhaustion, by fear, by the sickening history he has just uncovered. But the figures remain, unmoving, their presence as solid as the trees surrounding them. The lantern light flickers across the yard, and in that flicker he catches the suggestion of hollow eyes and sunken cheeks, faces drained of warmth, perhaps drained of life entirely. He calls out to them, his voice cracking in the stillness, asking if they are all right, if they need help. Neither figure responds. Instead, their heads tilt in perfect unison, a slow, unnatural motion that sends a cold shock through his body. There is no confusion, no fear in their posture, only recognition, as though they have been waiting for him just as patiently as the voice in the well. The forest seems to lean inward, amplifying the oppressive silence, and the drifter senses that the ground between him and the figures is not just distance but an invitation. He steps back instinctively, feeling the boards of the house shift faintly beneath his feet, as though urging him not to run but to stay and witness whatever comes next. Then, without warning, the lantern's flame sputters. In that brief dimming, the figures close the space between them and the trees, moving without sound, without steps, as if gliding. When the light steadies again, they are closer, no more than 20 yards away. Still silent. Still watching. Their dresses hang in damp tatters, clinging to their thin forms, and their hands appear stained with something dark that glints wetly in the lantern light. The drifter's breath stumbles in his chest as he realizes these are not the ghosts of children. These are the sisters as they are now, something that survived the night of the storm not as victims or villains, but as lingering shadows shaped by the well, the cellar, and the darkness that swallowed their childhood. In 1894 Alabama, families in rural communities often kept their matters to themselves, and the sisters had relied on that culture of privacy to hide what they had done after chaining their parents in the old well. The structure stood behind the house, half covered in vines and long abandoned, and neighbors assumed it was just another forgotten relic on their worn-out farmland. For weeks, the girls went about their daily routines quietly, interacting with townsfolk only when necessary, always careful to appear composed and ordinary. But their behavior, as later testimonies revealed, held small cracks, nervous glances, odd hours awake, and an unusual reluctance to let anyone near their property. These small details grew suspicious only after the disappearance of their parents became too noticeable, as the community wondered why the couple, usually active and seen in church, had suddenly vanished without farewell or explanation. The turning point came when a traveling feed merchant mentioned to the sheriff that the sisters kept refusing delivery toward the back of the property, insisting everything be dropped near the front porch. This was out of character for a family known for storing supplies close to the barn, and curiosity slowly turned into concern. When the sheriff arrived for a welfare check, the sisters tried to stall him with vague comments about illness and rest, but by then their fearful eyes betrayed more than their words could hide. The sheriff later testified that the silence around the property felt unnatural, as though the land itself was holding its breath. When he discovered the well sealed with a heavy wooden board and iron chains, he knew something was wrong. The sisters broke down first with denial, then with rambling explanations about suffering, curses, and old family sins that no one in the town had ever heard of. Their confessions revealed years of mistreatment, forced isolation, and a twisted legacy of inbreeding that had shaped their lives long before the crime. What shocked investigators most was not just the act itself, but how calmly the sisters had lived afterward, convinced that what they had done was not evil but necessary. This final revelation shattered the quiet image of the rural community and exposed the generational cycle that had turned desperation into the most terrible revenge of that era.